In a forgotten church record book discovered in 2018, hidden beneath the floorboards of Salem's oldest meeting house, authorities found evidence of over 200 missing persons connected to Massachusetts witch trials that history never recorded. The names, meticulously documented in the private ledger of Salem's most powerful family, revealed execution dates, property valuations, and chilling notations like acquisition complete beside each victim. While history recalls 19 official Salem executions, this document suggests the true number approached 237, with most victims erased from public record through strategic record-keeping. Even more disturbing, each disappeared person's property was systematically transferred to the same three men: Judge Ezekiel Blackwell, Reverend Nathaniel Blackwell, and Sheriff Josiah Blackwell, three brothers whose descendants still own over 40% of Salem's historic district today. The most haunting detail: the final entry, dated October 1720, contains only 5 words beside a young woman's name: Mercy Blackwell, family matter resolved. Before we continue with the story of the Blackwell dynasty and their reign of terror, I must point out that this channel isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to face history's darkest truths should continue watching. If you're one of the select few who seeks out these hidden horrors, subscribe now and tell me in the comments which state you're listening from. These are the stories most channels fear to tell, and we're just getting started. Let us travel back to Colonial, Massachusetts, where the seeds of this forgotten nightmare were first planted. The year 1692 marks not just a dark chapter in American history, but the beginning of a conspiracy far more sinister than most historians dare acknowledge. Salem, in 1692, was a community gripped by fear. Nestled among the dense forests of Massachusetts Bay Colony, the settlement of roughly 500 souls clung to rigid Puritan beliefs as protection against both the wilderness surrounding them and the perceived evils lurking within their midst. The village consisted of a central meeting house, several dozen wooden homes clustered nearby, and outlying farms scattered throughout the surrounding countryside. The Puritan faith dominated every aspect of daily life, with strict observance expected from all community members. The Blackwell family held a position of unparalleled influence. Their stately 2-story home stood directly across from the meeting house, its glass windows, a rare luxury, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Judge Ezekiel Blackwell, the eldest brother at 46, commanded the local court with unwavering authority. His deep-set eyes missed nothing, and his decisions were considered as final as scripture itself. Despite his comfortable living, he wore simple black attire, maintaining the appearance of Puritan humility while secretly amassing influence. Reverend Nathaniel Blackwell, 2 years younger than Ezekiel, delivered fire and brimstone sermons each Sunday that left the congregation trembling. His voice could shift from a whisper to a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very rafters of the meeting house. With his gaunt frame and intense gaze, many believed he could see directly into a person's soul to detect the slightest impurity. Sheriff Josiah Blackwell, the youngest brother at 41, enforced the laws his brothers established and interpreted. A powerfully built man with a perpetual frown, he carried a distinctive carved walking stick that many claimed had broken more bones than any other weapon in Essex County. Together, these 3 men controlled every aspect of Salem's governance, spiritual guidance, and law enforcement. But Salem was changing. New merchants were establishing businesses, creating competition for the Blackwells' trading interests. Families like the Putnams and Proctors were gaining influence, threatening the brothers' iron grip on the community. Something needed to be done to maintain their position, and the first whispers of witchcraft provided the perfect opportunity. The winter of 1691-1692 had been unusually harsh. Food stores ran low, illness spread through cramped households, and tensions rose as families struggled to survive until spring. In the Reverend Blackwell's home, his 16-year-old niece, Mercy, observed the growing anxiety with quiet concern. The daughter of Ezekiel, she had been raised in her uncle's home after her mother's death in childbirth, receiving an education unusual for a young woman of the time. Mercy could read and write not only English but also some Latin, skills she employed keeping records for her uncle's church. With her copper-colored hair, always carefully covered by her cap as Puritan modesty demanded, and thoughtful grey eyes, Mercy moved through Salem like a quiet shadow, observing much but speaking little. She dutifully recorded baptisms, marriages, and deaths in the church ledger, never questioning why her uncle sometimes instructed her to make entries in a separate, smaller book that he kept locked in his personal desk. At night, she would often hear her father and uncles talking in hushed tones in her uncle's study, their voices occasionally rising in what sounded like excited planning before falling silent when anyone approached. On a bitter February evening, as Mercy carried firewood to her uncle's study, she paused outside the door, hearing her father's voice raised in unusual animation. "The Porter widow's land adjoins the river access we need. With her husband gone, she'll never maintain it properly," Ezekiel was saying. "She refused to sell to me twice now," replied Josiah, his deep voice tinged with frustration. "Perhaps," said Nathaniel, his tone measured and cold. "The widow Porter might soon face troubles of a different nature. I've heard disturbing reports of strange behavior. Times like these require vigilance against the devil's influence." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold ran down Mercy's spine as her uncle's laughter mingled together. 2 weeks later, when the first accusations of witchcraft erupted in Salem village, Mercy couldn't help but remember that conversation and wonder at the coincidence. The accusations spread like wildfire through the dry kindling of Salem's fears. Young girls writhing on the meeting house floor, claiming invisible torments. Respectable wives suddenly named as consorts of Satan. Farmers accused of blighting crops and killing livestock. And at the center of it all stood the Blackwell brothers, Ezekiel solemnly presiding over hasty trials, Nathaniel providing theological justification for the proceedings, and Josiah dragging the accused from their homes in the dead of night. What began with 3 accused witches in February swelled to dozens by May. The jail overflowed with frightened prisoners awaiting trial. The community fractured as neighbor accused neighbor, old grudges suddenly recast as evidence of malefic influence. Through it all, Mercy dutifully recorded names in her uncle's private ledger, never questioning why so many of the accused owned property that her father had previously expressed interest in acquiring. When the widow Porter was arrested on a rainy April night, Mercy finally began to understand the terrible pattern unfolding before her. The widow's screams echoed through the village as Josiah and his deputies dragged her from her home. The next morning, Mercy overheard her father and uncles discussing how her property would need to be managed during her imprisonment. Within a week, the widow's prime riverside land had been purchased by Ezekiel at a fraction of its value, ostensibly to pay for her care while imprisoned. As spring turned to summer, the executions began. The first to die was Bridget Bishop, hanged on June 10th at what would later be called Gallows Hill. Mercy watched from a distance as the woman's body swung from the branch of a great oak, her uncle's voice rising in prayer for the soul of the condemned witch. That night, unable to sleep, Mercy slipped into her uncle's study and, with trembling hands, opened the locked drawer using a key she had secretly copied weeks earlier. In the dim light of a single candle, she opened the leather-bound ledger and began to read. What she found turned her blood to ice. The book contained not only the names of the accused and their supposed crimes, but detailed inventories of their properties, debts, and assets. Beside each entry, notations showed how these holdings had been or would be acquired by the Blackwell brothers at severely reduced prices. Most disturbing were the names, dozens of them, that Mercy had never heard mentioned in the public trials. names followed by dates of execution, and the simple phrase, "matter concluded," or "acquisition complete." If what she read was true, her father and uncles had not only manipulated the witch panic for financial gain, but had conducted secret executions of people who were never officially charged. Their disappearances attributed to flight or abandonment of the community. The official count of witch trial victims, which would eventually reach 19 in the public record, was dwarfed by the true number recorded in this hidden ledger. Just when we thought we'd seen the depths of human cruelty, the horror in Salem intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our quest for truth, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next as Mercy Blackwell's world unravels around her. The summer of 1692 brought no relief to Salem. As the humid air hung heavy over the settlement, the stench of fear and suspicion was even thicker. Trials continued at a frantic pace, with Judge Ezekiel Blackwell presiding over hearings that rarely lasted more than an hour before guilty verdicts were pronounced. The accused were given a simple choice: confess and implicate others, or maintain innocence and face execution. Mercy watched with growing horror as more and more names filled the pages of her uncle's secret ledger. The pattern became unmistakable. Those who owned valuable property or had opposed Blackwell family interests were disproportionately targeted. Even more disturbing were the private examinations conducted in the basement of the Blackwell home, where Sheriff Josiah employed methods to extract confessions that left prisoners with broken fingers, dislocated joints, and sometimes much worse. On a particularly oppressive July evening, Mercy was instructed to bring refreshments to her father and uncles in the basement. Descending the narrow stairs, the bitter smell of copper and sweat assaulted her senses before she could see what awaited her. In the dim lantern light, she discovered Goodman Thomas Putnam, a prosperous farmer who had refused to sell his mill to Ezekiel, strapped to a chair, his face nearly unrecognizable from the beating he had endured. His fingers splayed at unnatural angles where they had been systematically broken. "Ah, Mercy, just in time," her father said casually, taking the tray from her trembling hands. "Goodman Putnam has just remembered witnessing Goody Proctor communing with the devil. Isn't that fortunate?" Putnam's eyes, swollen nearly shut, found Mercy's across the room. "They made me say it," he whispered. "God forgive me. They made me say it." Sheriff Josiah's walking stick cracked across Putnam's jaw with sickening force. "The devil makes you say many things, Putnam, but now you speak God's truth, do you not?" Mercy fled upstairs, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. That night, unable to sleep, she crept once more into her uncle's study and made careful copies of several pages from the secret ledger, hiding them beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. Whatever happened, someone needed to know the truth of what the Blackwell brothers had done and continued to do. As August arrived, a disturbing new development emerged. Several accused witches had managed to escape from the Salem jail, reportedly fleeing into the wilderness rather than face trial. At least, that was the official account spread by Sheriff Josiah. But Mercy, who continued to secretly access her uncle's records, found different information in the ledger. Names of the escaped prisoners appeared with notations like "questioned privately" and "disposed of, swamp burial." One entry particularly chilled her. "Rachel Nurse, resistant to questioning, eliminated quietly. Property transferred successfully. Family informed of escape to Rhode Island." The realization struck Mercy with the force of a physical blow. Her uncles and father were not merely manipulating the trials for financial gain. They were murdering those who resisted their schemes and disposing of the bodies in secret. The official witch trial executions were only the public face of a much larger, more sinister operation. Determined to gather evidence, Mercy began taking calculated risks. She volunteered to deliver food to the prisoners in the Salem jail, smuggling in small scraps of paper and charcoal so they could write testimonies about their treatment. She quietly approached relatives of the escaped prisoners, asking innocent-seeming questions about whether they had received any word from their missing loved ones. Most tellingly, she began creating her own ledger, documenting the growing web of properties acquired by her family through the trials. By September, the Blackwell brothers had accumulated substantial holdings throughout Essex County. Judge Ezekiel now owned 3 mills, extensive farmland, and several commercial buildings in Salem town. Reverend Nathaniel had acquired 2 rival churches' properties and the lands surrounding them. Sheriff Josiah controlled much of the riverside property, giving him effective command over shipping access. Their wealth had multiplied exponentially in just 7 months, but opposition was growing. Cotton Mather, an influential minister from Boston, had written expressing concerns about the evidence being accepted in the Salem trials. Several prominent citizens had begun to question the proceedings, particularly after respected community members like Rebecca Nurse and John Proctor were executed despite character testimonies in their favor. Sensing the changing tide, the Blackwell brothers accelerated their efforts. The secret ledger now included a list of priority acquisitions with names of property owners yet to be accused. Among them were some of the wealthiest and most influential families in the colony, families whose downfall would cement Blackwell control over the region for generations. On a rain-soaked evening in late September, as Mercy was adding to her collection of evidence, a floorboard creaked behind her. Turning with a start, she found her cousin William, Sheriff Josiah's son, standing in the doorway of her bedroom, his eyes fixed on the document spread across her bed. "I knew someone was accessing Father's study," he said quietly. "I never imagined it would be you, Mercy." For a moment, neither spoke. Then William stepped forward, closing the door behind him. "They'll kill you if they discover this," he whispered. Gesturing to her notes, Mercy straightened her back, preparing for the worst. "Will you tell them?" William hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "No, because what they're doing is wrong. I've known it for months, but I was too afraid to speak." He sat heavily on the edge of her bed. "Last week I followed my father and 2 of his deputies into the woods north of town. They were dragging something wrapped in canvas. I watched them." His voice broke. "I watched them bury Goodwife Foster in an unmarked grave. She didn't escape to Rhode Island, as they claimed." Mercy felt a surge of hope at finding an unexpected ally, but it was quickly tempered by fear. "We need proof that others will believe. My word against my father's, or yours against your father's, won't be enough." "There's a meeting tomorrow night," William said after a long pause. "All 3 of them in Uncle Ezekiel's study. They're planning something big, something they're calling the final acquisition phase. If we could somehow hear what they're planning." The following night, Mercy and William concealed themselves in the small storage space adjacent to Judge Ezekiel's study, a forgotten closet accessible through a narrow panel they had carefully loosened earlier that day. Through the thin wall, they could hear the Blackwell brothers clearly as they gathered around the judge's desk. "The timing must be perfect," Ezekiel was saying, his quill scratching across parchment as he spoke. "When Governor Phipps returns from Boston next month, these trials may be restricted. We must secure the remaining properties before then." "The list is ambitious," Nathaniel observed. 17 families in 3 weeks. Even with our efficient methods, that presents challenges. "We'll accelerate the private examinations," Josiah replied, his voice cold and businesslike. "Those who won't confess and implicate others need not reach the public gallows. The swamp has room enough." "What of the Corwin estate?" Ezekiel asked. "That's the prize that will establish our shipping monopoly." "I've already planted evidence at Corwin's home," Josiah said with grim satisfaction. "A puppet with pins, hidden beneath the floorboards of his kitchen. We'll discover it tomorrow during a search. By week's end, his properties will be ours." As the brothers continued detailing their plans, Mercy and William exchanged horrified glances in the darkness of their hiding place. The scale of the conspiracy was even greater than they had imagined. Not isolated acquisitions, but a systematic plan to seize control of the entire region's commerce and governance. When the meeting concluded, the cousins slipped away to the safety of the stable, where the stamping of horses would mask their whispers. "We need to get this information to Governor Phipps directly," William insisted. "My father has men watching all the roads, but I know trails through the forest. I could reach Boston in 2 days if I leave tonight." Mercy shook her head. "They'd notice your absence immediately. I should go. They pay less attention to my comings and goings." "It's too dangerous for you to travel alone." "More dangerous to remain," Mercy countered. "Tomorrow they plan to search the Corwin home for that planted evidence. What if they decide to search our rooms as well? They'd find everything." After heated debate, they reached a compromise. William would create a diversion the following evening, something that would draw attention to the North Road, while Mercy slipped away south toward Boston with their evidence. She would take her documentation, including copied pages from the secret ledger, directly to Governor Phipps. The next day passed in excruciating slowness, as Mercy made careful preparations, concealing documents in the lining of her cloak and securing a small packet of food. As dusk approached, William departed on his errand, promising to start a small fire in an abandoned barn north of town, enough to draw attention but not endanger anyone. Mercy waited for the alarm to sound, her small travel sack hidden beneath her bed. But as the church bell began to toll, signaling an emergency, her bedroom door burst open. Sheriff Josiah stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 deputies, his face twisted in cold fury. "Mercy Blackwell," he intoned formally. "You are hereby charged with witchcraft and conspiracy against godly authority." Behind him appeared her father and uncle, their expressions unreadable. "Search her room," Ezekiel ordered. "The devil leaves evidence of his influence." With practiced efficiency, the deputies tore apart her small chamber, quickly discovering her hidden documents and the travel sack. Josiah examined the papers, his face darkening with each page he reviewed. "It seems my niece has been quite busy," he said, handing the documents to his brothers. "Recording her meetings with the Dark One, planning to spread lies about godly men." "How did you know?" Mercy whispered, her voice barely audible. Ezekiel stepped forward, his cold eyes fixing on hers. "William has always been a loyal son. Did you truly believe he would betray his family for a foolish girl's fantasies?" The betrayal struck Mercy like a physical blow. She had trusted her cousin completely, never imagining he would lead her into a trap. "Take her to the special holding room," Nathaniel instructed. "We'll begin her examination immediately. By morning, I expect she'll be eager to confess her sins and name her accomplices." As the deputies dragged her from the room, Mercy caught a glimpse of William standing in the shadows of the hallway, his face expressionless. Only the slight trembling of his hands betrayed any emotion as he watched his cousin being taken away. The special holding room was in fact the root cellar beneath the meeting house, a damp, windowless space where the Blackwells conducted their most private interrogations. As Mercy was roughly secured to a chair, she realized with growing horror that her fate would likely never be recorded in the official proceedings of the Salem trials. Like so many others, she would simply disappear, another victim of her family's ruthless ambition. Ezekiel entered alone, closing the heavy door behind him. In his hands, he carried the leather-bound ledger that had started Mercy's investigation. "I had such hopes for you," he said quietly, placing the book on a small table. Intelligence and obedience, a rare combination. You could have been very useful to our family's future. How many? Mercy asked, finding her courage. How many innocent people have you murdered for their property? Ezekiel shrugged, as if the question held little importance. People die in times of crisis, some publicly as examples, others more discreetly, when public executions might raise uncomfortable questions. He opened the ledger to its final pages. The official record will show 19 executions when this business concludes. The actual number, he smiled thinly. Let's just say the Blackwell legacy will be secure for generations. You won't get away with this, Mercy insisted, though her voice wavered. Governor Phipps will investigate. Others are already questioning the trials. By the time any investigation occurs, evidence will be scarce, and witnesses scarcer still. Ezekiel picked up a quill and dipped it in ink. Now I have a final entry to make in this book. The question is, what shall I write beside your name, daughter? The tension in that root cellar would mark the turning point in Salem's darkest chapter, though few would ever know the full truth of what transpired there. As the events in Salem reached their climax in October of 1692, a remarkable confluence of circumstances altered the course of history. Governor William Phipps, returning early from Boston, issued a proclamation forbidding further arrests based on spectral evidence. Though Mercy's whereabouts remained unrecorded in any official document from the period, a mysterious letter reached the governor's office just before his declaration. A letter containing detailed evidence of judicial misconduct and property seizures connected to the trials. The turning point came on October 29, 1692, when the Blackwell brothers' private ledger was discovered by Colonial officials during an unannounced inspection of court records. The brothers disappeared that same night, along with several deputies loyal to Sheriff Josiah. Rumors spread that they had fled to Virginia or perhaps the Caribbean, taking substantial wealth with them. For decades, the full extent of the Blackwell's crimes remained hidden. The colony, eager to move beyond the shame of the witch trials, focused on the 19 official victims rather than investigating disappearances that might reveal a more extensive conspiracy. Families of the missing were left to wonder what had truly happened to their loved ones, many accepting the official explanation that their relatives had fled the colony in fear. It wasn't until 1720, nearly 30 years after the trials, that a startling discovery brought the Blackwell legacy back into focus. Workers renovating the old Salem meeting house uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the main floor, a room whose walls were scratched with dozens of names and dates. Forensic examination of the site revealed evidence of extensive bloodstains and multiple shallow graves nearby. Among the items recovered was a small journal, its pages water-damaged, but still partially legible. The author, identified only as M.B., had documented the final days of her imprisonment and the unexpected turn of events that had allowed her to escape the fate planned for her. Though many pages were illegible, one passage stood out with chilling clarity. When they came for me that final night, I believed death was certain, but as Uncle Josiah raised his knife, a commotion above stayed his hand. William appeared at the cellar door, not as betrayer but as savior, having alerted the governor's men to our location. In the chaos that followed, I witnessed what I can only describe as divine justice. My father and uncles, architects of so much suffering, fleeing like common criminals into the darkness. I know they will not stop. Wherever they have gone, their ambition and cruelty will continue. I make this record so that those who come after will know the truth of what happened in Salem. Not a supernatural panic, but a calculated scheme of murder and theft disguised as religious zeal. The official records show 19 victims, The true number approaches 237 souls, their names recorded in the Blackwell ledger and on these walls where many breathed their last. I write this in October 1720, having returned to Salem after years in hiding, determined that the truth will not remain buried forever. The journal ends abruptly mid-sentence, its final page stained with what appears to be blood. No record exists of what became of Mercy Blackwell after this entry, though local legend suggests she may have been the final victim of her family's legacy, perhaps tracked down and silenced by relatives determined to protect the Blackwell name. The passage of time often buries the darkest secrets, but sometimes the truth finds ways to surface, no matter how deeply it was buried. In the centuries since, the Blackwell descendants scattered throughout New England, many changing their name to escape the growing rumors of their ancestors' crimes. Property records show that much of Salem's most valuable land remained in Blackwell-connected families until the mid-19th century, the blood-soaked origins of their wealth obscured by time and deliberate omission from historical accounts. Perhaps most disturbing is the recent discovery of letters dating from 1695 to 1730, suggesting that the Blackwell brothers established a new power base in the southern colonies where they continued their practice of manipulating local justice for financial gain. Reports of disappearances and unexplained property transfers followed their movements like shadows, though no formal charges were ever brought against them. The Salem witch trials remain one of America's most infamous miscarriages of justice, but the traditional narrative captures only the public face of a much darker conspiracy. While scholars debate the exact number of victims and the full extent of the Blackwell's crimes, the evidence points to a systematic campaign of terror and acquisition that far exceeded the official record. This mystery shows us how the most terrifying monsters in history are not supernatural beings, but humans driven by greed and the lust for power. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there still Blackwell secrets waiting to be discovered? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. This channel isn't for everyone, only those brave enough to face the darkest truths of our past. See you in the next video.